Welcome, everybody. I'm Lisa Sorensen, Executive Director of Birds Caribbean, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar today. Introduction to Sound Recording, How You Can Help Fill the Caribbean's Data Gaps. Bird sound recordings are an essential tool for bird conservation, research, and education, helping scientists track populations, study vocal behavior, and improve tools like Merlin Sound ID. However, many Caribbean bird species remain underrepresented in global science archives, leaving significant data gaps in Macaulay Library and limiting our understanding of both resident and migratory birds. So in this introductory session, we'll cover why bird sound recordings are important, the role of recordings in conservation and research, and how you can make high-quality recordings, even just using your smartphone. Our presenters today will guide you through basic recording techniques, how to improve audio quality, equipment options, and simple editing tools. You'll also later hear about the Sound ID project and opportunities to help fill critical data gaps and quarterly recorded challenges that make participation fun and challenging. This is the first in a two-part webinar series. In a follow-up session, we'll dive deeper into advanced recording techniques, editing tools, and training opportunities for annotators. So our speakers today are Colin Hanks and Jay McGowan. We are delighted to welcome you today. Colin is the partner network lead for eBird, Merlin Bird ID, and the Macaulay Library. Colin is a lifelong birder from the Gulf Coast of Texas, whose interest in nature led to a career focused on birds and conservation. His primary role at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology is to support the network of partners that use eBird and Merlin tools to engage communities and birds and collect useful data for research and conservation efforts. Jay is a project leader at the Macaulay Library, specializing in sound recordings and media archives. He's a passionate birder and sound recorder from upstate New York. He plays many roles at the Cornell Lab, including choosing and editing Merlin content, training Merlin Sound ID, and leading sound recording workshops and expeditions, all with the goal of helping others discover the magic of recording birds and increasing the quantity and quality of their recordings. So Colin will present first, and then followed by Jay. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. We will monitor those questions, and we'll have a time for questions and answers and discussion at the end of the presentations. We will also monitor on Facebook and look for questions there as well. So if you're watching from Facebook, please go ahead and answer and address your questions there. All right. With that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will let Colin take it away. Welcome, Colin.
Do y'all see my first slide? Let me try this again. Do you see my first slide now? Jay, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I see your presenter view, actually.
That's strange. One more time. How about now?
Yes, looking good.
Awesome. All right, great. Lisa, thank you so much for having us. It's great to be part of this webinar. I only wish we were doing this in person. So we were going out, sound recording in the Caribbean after the webinar, instead of me sitting here in Ithaca, New York, where there's still some snow on the ground. So yes, I'm going to be talking about kind of our collection and why we're so focused on sound recording right now, and then Jay is going to kind of give an introduction to how to get started with sound recording. In addition, Fabricio Gorleri is going to give the same presentation in Spanish tomorrow. So I think first, I think it's helpful to understand the context for how we hope to contribute to conservation by building tools that can really support the community and engage communities in a way that not only supports the community, but also contributes data to actionable science that supports conservation action. And I think in the Caribbean, supporting organizations like Birds Caribbean is one of our highest goals, is to create tools that are going to support the efforts and objectives. And it's one of the reasons we're so excited to be able to partner with Birds Caribbean. And so, as many of you know, at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, we have this platform, eBird, that allows you to record your observations. And people have uploaded 1.9 billion observations around the world. In addition, on eBird, you can upload your photos and sounds. And those sounds go to the Macaulay Library. Now, the Macaulay Library has been around for much longer. It actually predates eBird, but we started connecting these two platforms in 2015. And since then, that's really allowed us to scale. So now in the Macaulay Library, we have 72 million photos and 2.6 million sound recordings. And you might ask, like, why do we want so many photos and so many sound recordings? And that's a little bit of what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to be focusing on the Macaulay Library. So I'm going to take my eBird hat off here and focus on the Macaulay Library part of our platform here at the Lab of Ornithology. The first thing I want to say about the Macaulay Library is that this data is available for anybody to explore, and anybody can use these the media, the sound recordings, the photos and videos for research and conservation efforts. The photographers or the sound recorders still retain the commercial license, but you can go in, you can explore right now all of this media from around the world. And you can filter it by species, or you could filter it by region. So right here, this view is a filtered view to the media that you can find from Cuba. And you can do that for any country or any sub-region within a country. And people do use that, and people can download this data. They can submit a request for a research project. You don't have to be at a university or a professor to do research. If you have a question, you can use this media to help your research project. For example, there were some people doing research on female song, trying to understand which groups of birds had female song, and having one collection from birds around the world. I do have a recording of this, but unfortunately, we're not able to share sound on the webinar, so I can't share that. But they were able, using the collection, to understand which groups around the world actually have female song. So this is kind of one example of basic research of how people researchers are using the Macaulay Library. In addition, um, um, a lot of taxonomic questions and research use our sound recordings. And so, for example, genetics has come to play a really vital role in understanding the difference between different populations. But sound also helps inform our understanding of the extent of those populations. And so we're able to document that there was these two species, southern red-fronted tinkerbird and northern red-fronted tinkerbird. And there was genetic analysis that really helped document these two different species in this split. However, sound recordings was extremely important in understanding the extent of each of these species. And that continues to play a vital role in things like that. Another different kind of use case for why media can be important is for conservation. And here's a really cool example that the Macaulay Library is involved in, being led by BirdLife International, American Bird Conservancy, and Rewild. And that is the Lost Birds Project. The Lost Birds Project is a project focused on any species of bird that hasn't been documented in the last 10 years. And they start with the Macaulay Library and then look at other sources like iNaturalist to look at what are the species that have no photos or sound recordings from the last 10 years. And you can go and explore that on the Lost Birds website. They have a map. The web link is searchforlostbirds.org, and you can see what are the species in the Caribbean that haven't been seen. You can see the last year that they were documented, that there is any kind of documented evidence of that bird. So for the Cuban kite, that was 2009. And the hope is by focusing on these, then we can identify species that might be in severe decline before it's too late. So those were some examples for how the collection is being used. But I want to talk about how the entire collection is being used to support communities, coming back to how can we activate the public around birds and support conservation. And one of our main projects is Merlin Bird ID. And Merlin, in so many ways, really does use that entire database of 1.9 billion observations to tell you what species are likely, as well as the entire collection of photos and sounds. The first thing, of course, is the species accounts. Without everybody uploading all these photos and sounds, there's no way we could have one bird identification app that is global with species accounts from birds around the world. All of the photos and sounds that you see in there are sounds that coming from the Macaulay Library and were most likely uploaded through eBird. As an example, this Hispaniola and Oriole was this photo here was uploaded by Alan Van Norman from the Dominican Republic, and you can see where all these different sounds and photos come from within the Merlin app. But it really does use not just those photos in the species accounts, it uses photos in the entire collection in the form of training our photo ID tool. So here's an example of a photo I took when I was in South Africa of a bird, and I just uploaded it to Merlin Bird ID, and it suggested, hey, check out the red-chested cuckoo, because this bird looks like a red-chested cuckoo. And you can do that for any photo you take. It's quite good and covers the majority of species around the world. And as you upload more photos, it is then we're continuing to use those photos to update and improve this model. And so this model is only getting better over time with the more photos that you add to the collection. Now we're doing this similar thing with photo ID, where we used AI, training an AI model based on the entire photo collection with sound. What we're doing is we're taking sounds and basically creating photos in the form of a spectrogram, and training Sound ID to identify based on the pattern in those images. And so what Merlin does is it basically, as it's listening, it listens to a 3-second, it takes a cut of like 3 seconds, and then it looks at that for patterns of different songs and suggests what species might be singing. And so in this case, it's looking at that pattern and saying, this looks like the pattern of a western meadowlark. This looks like the pattern of a common yellowthroat. And these sounds, this pattern right here, again, looks like a western meadowlark. As a result, what we can do is for people going out in nature, they can open Merlin and they can hit record. And as they're listening, and I apologize if the sound isn't working, as they're listening, they can actually see the birds pop up as they're singing. And so this is an example of a recording from, this example would have been from South Carolina, somebody going out into the woods and listening to birds on a morning where there's quite a few things singing. Since we've launched Sound ID, one of the things that's been amazing is to see how many people are using this tool. I think our original launch was around 2022. And after we launched Sound ID, we saw a dramatic increase in the areas where Sound ID had full coverage in North America and in Europe, to the point where we had close to 6 million observers this last summer. Just this last summer in February, we had over 3 million people still using Merlin. This right here, unfortunately, on our webinar, our sound isn't working, so I can't share this. But we created this montage of people on TikTok who are using Sound ID. And one of the things that it really shows is that we're reaching a much broader audience through Sound ID than we were through eBird. In fact, there's well over 10 people or 20 people using Sound ID in different regions, or Merlin, compared to eBird. And that's really exciting, because the goal of Merlin is more than just to collect data. It's also to engage people in birds, and hopefully in ways that are going to support conservation efforts in regions around the world. The challenge is that we need to have 150 sound recordings for each species in order to train it at a level where we can have confidence in the results. And so, if you look at North America, Sound ID covers 68%, and we have 150 recordings for 75% of species. In the Caribbean, it already covers 66%. So it already covers the majority of species you can find in the Caribbean. And we have enough data for the majority of species you have in the Caribbean. The challenge with the Caribbean is that that doesn't necessarily mean we have all of the common species, because that's really biased by migrants and widespread species. What we're really missing are the more local species that can also be quite common in the Caribbean, but may not have as large a distribution. When you look at focus in on the Caribbean, you can see that, again, Sound ID covers the majority of species in most countries, maybe less in Trinidad and Tobago. But when you look at what it's missing, here are some of the common species in the Caribbean that it does not cover. So, for example, Lesser Antillean bullfinch only has 51 recordings. Hispaniolan woodpecker only has 90 recordings, and the Puerto Rican lizard cuckoo only has 72 recordings. The species on the right are just some of the more common species in different parts of the Caribbean that do not have enough sound recordings to train it for Sound ID, that we would love to get more sound recordings. And I think Jay may have a list that he can share in the chat with a more extensive list of high priority targets that are common species that would be good recording targets if you are interested in going out and getting some recordings. I will point out that there's a lot of people already recording in the Caribbean. Last month, we had over 80 people uploading sounds from the Caribbean. They uploaded over 700 sound recordings from the Caribbean. The majority of those sound recordings came from two islands, Cuba and Puerto Rico. And so I just wanted to mention that, and certainly thank anybody who's uploading sound recordings. Those are really important, because we have a lot of people recording in North America, but we certainly would love to see more recordings from the Caribbean so that we can train on those resident species. I want to mention that after we have enough sound recordings, the next step is that we work with local experts to go in using an online tool to differentiate the different sounds in a sound recording. We have people go in and draw boxes so that we can differentiate between in this case, the black-throated green warbler and the sounds of a red-eyed vireo. This we call annotations. Really really improves the performance of the model and helps us use the recording, so that we're not, in this case, using this recording to train the model to think red-eyed vireo when it hears a black-throated green warbler, or the reverse. If you're interested in participating in this and you have good sound identification skills, let us know, and there may be opportunities to participate in this project for the Caribbean. I want to mention one more thing about Sound ID. Even when it doesn't cover the species, this is a great tool for sound identification. This is an example. I was recently in South Africa, in an area where it only covered 18% of the species, but it was still a really useful tool for identifying birds, because I could record a bird, in this case, and see the pattern, see what it looked like, and listen to it later. And so I was in a park, I couldn't see a bird, but I heard it calling up in a tree, and so I just got that recording. And then I could go and listen to some calls for potential species and see what that pattern looks like. I could also go and look at what that species, in this case, it was a spectacled weaver. I could look and see what the sounds of that bird sounded like in that part of South Africa where I was. And so in this case, what I did is I went to the Macaulay Library and I said, okay, I was in South Africa, not looking at its overall range, and I could pull up similar sounds from that area. And you can share these sounds. And so, for example, if I was in upstate New York and I got a recording that I didn't know, I might be like, I don't know what this is. I can't figure it out. I might send it to Jay, because Jay, he's from upstate New York. He knows all the sounds, and so he could probably help me identify it. Now, Sound ID, we think, is an incredible tool to help especially new birders to connect with birds and answer that basic question: is what is that bird I'm hearing, when they're excited and interested in birds. But there's also incredible potential to support monitoring through remote acoustic units or microphones that you could put out in nature to listen and collect data on birds. One of the big challenges of these microphones is actually going through and getting the data off the microphone to know what it heard. And these these species classification models are going to be an incredibly powerful tool. One of the big challenges, of course, is that when these Sound ID models, while they may be good at identifying a species, it's harder to differentiate the number of individuals that you're recording. And this is something that you are probably pretty good at. It's getting an estimate of how many individuals you're seeing. But the Sound ID model, it's better identifying a species than it is saying whether there's one of them or there's 1,000 of them. And so there's some real challenges for how we use this acoustic data to complement observational data from birders that are out in the field. But it is really exciting, especially in areas that are either hard to get to or are major data gaps from observational data. So so let's go sound recording. I just want to mention that in addition to the kind of research and conservation value of sound recordings and the value to the birding community, sound recording is a great thing for birders. It's a great way to experience nature. It's a great way to improve your skills as a birder, not only to learn, but also as a way of documenting birds. And I have to point out that it's a lot cheaper than cameras. And so compared to photography, the equipment is much more accessible. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jay, who's going to talk about how you can get into sound recording.
All right. Thanks for that, Colin. It was a great overview of the data collection challenges that we face for sound recording. So I want to talk a little bit now about how any of you can kind of contribute to this, to the global database that is eBird in the Macaulay Library, and specifically how to kind of go out and make sound recordings. Let me share my screen here. How does that look, Colin? Are you seeing
I'm
the
not.
slide there? You're not. Oh, wait, here we go. How about now? Wait a second.
No,
Yeah,
I'm not thinking.
exactly the same. How about that?
Yes.
Cool. So yeah, I want to talk through a little bit about kind of the process of making a sound recording. Um, Throughout this, the way that we're thinking about sound recording. So Cullen showed those kind of autonomous recorders, right, that you can put out for acoustic monitoring. Those are super useful, super powerful for what they do. They're not necessarily the data that we need to train Merlin Sound ID or to use for exemplar recordings in Merlin or just for birders to use. When we think about the training data, the data that we need to make all these things, we're really thinking about what we call focal recordings. So you can think of a focal recording as all the birds out there in nature trying to really focus in on one or a group or a pair to the exclusion of everything else is kind of what we're trying for when we're making sound recordings in the field. Now, this is easier said than done, right? There's a lot of different sounds out there competing for your ears, for your microphone. But a bunch of the steps that I'm going to talk through now are with the end goal of getting a more focused recording. So just kind of keep that in mind. So the first piece you need to make a recording is a microphone, right? You need a sensor to hear those sounds and capture them. Microphones come in a lot of shapes and sizes, and one thing I'll be showing a bunch of a bunch of the slides, a bunch of these examples show some of these fancy directional microphones, and I'll talk about them in a minute. But I really want to make sure that we keep in mind your phone is also a microphone, right? So it's a microphone and a recorder in one. It's very practical and it's great for documenting species and gathering data for these models and all the things that Cullen was just talking about. It has some distinct downsides that I'll talk about in a minute, but as a starting place, as a place to learn, as a place to kind of contribute data with no additional need of gear on your side, it's a really powerful tool. So a phone is going to record. The downside is that it's recording in all directions, right? It has a microphone on it that is what's called an omnidirectional microphone. So like this little diagram shows, it's kind of recording everything, right? If a bird sings over there, that gets picked up. If it sings over there, that gets picked up. It's kind of getting everything. So some sort of additional techniques are really needed if you want to get a more focal recording, like we were just looking at. But there's some options for that. The little cone on the left is something we haven't tried out yet, but someone, a birder in Argentina, is developing as a potential way to kind of get a little bit more focal recording without doing anything other than using your phone. But otherwise, you can just kind of take your phone out, point it at something, and you'll at least pick up some sound. Another option to kind of take it to the next level is a shotgun microphone. This is a directional microphone. You've probably seen these in movie sets or maybe with people recording nature out in the wild. They're pretty portable and they definitely make higher quality recordings than just your phone because they're picking up more in one direction than the sounds coming in from the side, right? So they're sort of automatically a little bit focused on the bird that you're pointed at, which can make a really nice difference in how much kind of background sound you get compared to the target sound, the focal bird that you're trying to record. So the really big variety of prices, but you can often find some for under $100 US that can make a really nice difference in sound recording. So that's kind of maybe like the next level up. If you find that you're really excited about sound recording and want to kind of take your recordings to the next level, a shotgun microphone can be a nice way to do that. And then kind of the highest thing, if you really decide you're going to become obsessed with sound recording, like I and others in my department here are, then maybe you want to consider a parabolic reflector or a parabola, as we call them. Those are the most directional option. They are directional not by focusing exactly, but by amplifying things that are coming in directly to the dish, kind of like what happens when you cup your hands over your ears. And so they are able to really pinpoint in on a focal bird and make a very nice, like clean recording. They are a lot more expensive in general, though. They're so specialized. There are just not too many options. So it's not something that's available to everyone, or that everyone is willing to carry around in the field, quite frankly. But if you happen to have the means to attain one, I certainly highly recommend it. But again, that's kind of like the top level of obsession with sound recording. I had some sounds here to compare the three different things that I won't be able to play, but you can kind of see just on these waveforms how the shotgun, you can see the nice peaks in where those are bird songs. But then there's a kind of wide band of noise from the background. We're looking at a view that's called a waveform view or oscillogram of the sound. It's kind of showing like background sound and then the spikes in the birds. And if we saw the phone recording, it would look even more like a solid band where the birds are audible but not really standing out from the background. So this just shows a little bit of how the parabola can help kind of pull those sounds out from the background. Not going to worry about that. So then the other piece that you kind of need along with the sensor is something to capture, to save those recordings so that you can do something with them, listen to them later, upload them to the Macaulay Library, etc. This kind of shows the progression of recorders a little bit over the years. That's Ted Parker, famous neotropical ornithologist, there in the middle, using his trusty Nagra. And then, as you can see on the right, those are two of the recorders that we're using in the field a lot more these days that are very high quality and nicely portable, along with the phone, obviously counting as a recorder as well. A lot of different options out there at a range of prices, anywhere from $50 or $100 to many thousands of dollars. You don't really need one that's more than a couple of hundred dollars US, though, which is really great. Like Cullen said, comparing it to like photography where just the camera body would be a couple of thousand, and then the lens is anywhere upwards of a few thousand. It's really nice that you could get the best sound recording equipment that any of us would need to use for $1,000 US. Now that's a lot, right? You're not going to just invest that for nothing, but it's nice to know that like that's sort of the upper limit, and you can have the best gear out there. So when looking for a recorder, you just kind of want to look for something that's recording good quality files, that's relatively quiet, and that's going to be portable and useful in the field, right? You don't want to be carrying around a huge brick of a recorder if it means you're not going to bring it out hiking with you or something like that. And then, of course, you need some cables that match the recorder to the microphone. So those can be either an XLR or a stereo mini. So the XLR being the kind of bigger ones there. So just know that they're different microphones, use different types of cables, connect to different recorders, but it's all very easy to figure out. And then just thinking about recording settings just for a minute. Basically, you want to make sure that whatever you're using, whether it's your phone, a recorder, you're using kind of the highest quality settings you can so that you're making the most of your time in the field. Something that's an uncompressed file, like a .wav file, is the best. Recording in MP3s or M4As, which is the default for a lot of phone apps. You're compressing the file and you're going to lose a lot of information. So try to record in the highest quality possible. And we'll note, so Cullen was talking about using Merlin Sound ID to get identifications, but also using it as a recording app. It works just fine. So even if you don't care about the identifications, or you're birding in an area where you're not getting very many identification suggestions because we don't cover the birds in that area yet, you can still use it to make those recordings on your phone. I do this all the time. When I don't have, a parabola or something like that, I use my phone, make those recordings, and Merlin automatically saves them in those high resolution settings. It doesn't even have the option to save compressed files. So if you're looking for an easy app for making sound recordings, Merlin is a great one to start with. Okay, so let's just think through the kind of process of making a recording for a little bit. So you get to a recording site, you go out to recording, whether this is your backyard or a park or a national forest, anything like that. Keeping an eBird checklist is a really key part of the whole process. Cullen talked a little bit about some of the utility that we get from this eBird data, which is basically like what birds did you see during a set amount of time, right, at a given location. But it's also kind of the framework for how we get sound recordings into the Macaulay Library nowadays, which I'll look at in a few minutes. So it captures your location, it captures your date and time, and then it even keeps a track of where you walked so that we can more closely correlate this bird data with habitat use and things like that. And so it provides kind of all of that metadata that will be associated with the recordings you make or the photos you take kind of automatically in one place on your checklist. Okay, so now we're really getting into it. What are the things to keep in mind when you're going out and recording? And I want to emphasize, I'm showing a guy with a parabola here, great for him, but most of us will just be using our phones. And everything I'm going to talk about with these tips and techniques are just as important, maybe more important if you're just using your phone out there recording than if you have a directional microphone or some fancy equipment, okay? So first off, be as quiet as possible. Whether you're using your phone or a directional microphone, these microphones are very sensitive. So any movement you make is going to get picked up on the recording. Avoid other sources of noise can be really important. So you're going to get a better recording in a quiet woodland than you would next to a river, right? Now, you may need to go to the river to record some river species. That's fine, but just kind of keeping that in mind. If you're close to a road, try to move to a place farther from a road, farther from people, and find just a quieter situation to make a recording if possible. Getting close to the bird. I'll come back to this in a minute, but this is really kind of the number one thing you can do out in the field with a given microphone in a given place and a given bird. The biggest thing you can do to make a better recording is to get closer to that bird. The closer you are, the louder the bird is, the better the recording. Aiming the microphone. This is most important when you're using a directional microphone like a parabola, but it can be helpful with a phone too. It's good to kind of know where your microphone is on your phone and then at least somewhat point that so you're not blocking the microphone or something like that. So you're pointing it up at the bird as best you can. You can kind of test by like blowing into different microphones and make sure you know which one your app is using. Making good announcements. I'll come back to this in a moment as well, but this is a really important way to keep track of the data associated with your recordings. And again, all of this is kind of in pursuit of making a focal recording of a bird that does your best to eliminate other sources of noise. Okay, so I want to spend one more minute on the get closer idea because it is really, really key. It's again the biggest thing you can do in the field to make this your recording more focal, more focused on the bird that you're interested in recording. A kind of rule of thumb we often use when we're thinking about, moving around in the field is trying to cut our distance in half. Try to get twice as close to that bird. So if it's, 100 meters away, try to walk so that you're only 50 meters away. And that's going to basically double the perceived loudness of the bird and really make a significant difference in how good the quality of the recording sounds. So just try to cut that distance in half. Okay, another callback here, watching out for self noise. So the closer you are to the bird, the better, right? The closer something is to the microphone, the louder it is. Nothing will ever be as close to that microphone as you yourself, right? No matter how much you try to get close to a toady or a lizard cuckoo, it's never going to be as close as your body, your raincoat, your companions will all be really close. So try to keep a steady grip. Try not to move your hands too much because even that movement of hands will pick up a little bit on the microphone. Stand still. Your feet on gravel or twigs and sticks will make a lot of noise. Dress quietly using like a raincoat or something. It's really hard not to move a little bit and make some kind of swishing sounds that get picked up on the recording. So try to wear like soft clothing as best you can. Help your companions understand that sound recording is important and that talking in the background is going to have an effect on your recording. If you can kind of set that up ahead of time, so you have some hand signals or something like that to let them know that, okay, I'm serious, I'm going to start recording now, time to be quiet, that will help a lot with the quality. And then never hurts to have breakfast. So your tummy noises will get picked up in the recordings too. So again, just kind of keep in mind the sounds that you're making so that you can focus on the sounds that the birds are making. And then finally, I want to just talk about a voice announcement. This is just kind of a thing that recordists have learned to do, which is say out loud in their recording at the end of a recording what it was that happened in that recording. Why do we do that? It's really just, I can say from experience, it's really useful to remember what was happening in a recording. It's just because we're very visual, and if we don't have that visualization of a photo or a video later on, it's really challenging to remember what was happening in a given recording, unless you're listening to it just a few minutes later. So by making an announcement with some key data, you will preserve that memory, make that recording more valuable, and allow you to add the data to the recording when you upload it so that it has that value for others going forward. So it's great to include species identification, any noteworthy behaviors that the birds were exhibiting during the time of the recording. That's maybe the most important thing that's going to be lost if you don't sort of note it down right away. Whether playback was used, how many individuals were involved, if you could tell if they were male, female, juvenile, adults. And then if you have multiple recordings of the same bird, whether that was the same individual recorded again or a different individual, which would be great to know for people later on to know, okay, these are different songs. I can take them as separate data points. So those are just a few tips for making a recording out in the field. I'll give you guys some resources that kind of goes through a bunch of these tips again at the end here. So now I want to talk just for a moment about editing sounds. Now this part can get a little bit overwhelming, I know. So it's not required, but it can be a really nice way to, I won't say clean up your recordings, okay? Because we're not suggesting that we do kind of cosmetic editing, right? We don't encourage you to go in and try to remove background sounds or clean up things. That's really your job in the field, is to try to make the recordings as good as they can be. And if you don't do that in the field, the editing steps we're going to talk about are really more to make the recording easier to access, easier to listen to and see, not to clean it up necessarily. But that said, there are these couple of steps we can do that will make your recordings nicer to listen to, easier for you to look at and access later on, and easier to use for projects like Merlin Sound ID, Merlin example recordings, any of those things. There's a few different editing software that you can use. We don't have a good way to do this in the Merlin app right now. That's a future development that we're looking at, a way to do these editing steps in the app. So we're usually encouraging people to download their recordings to a computer and go through these editing steps. Again, if you feel up to it. So two programs we use a lot are Audacity and then Ocean Audio, which is what I'll be showing you in these examples. And those are both free software for Macs or PCs, and they do a really nice job of doing these editing steps, as well as being a great way to kind of review your recordings and reflect on them. It's a really great way. It can be challenging to know out in the field, what am I getting? What did I get a good recording? Using headphones is great if you have a directional microphone, but you're not always going to have that. And so reviewing your recordings using software like this is a great way to go as well. We don't have to spend too much time on this, but these are kind of the editing steps that somebody would go through, where they have a recording, they've got some handling noise at the beginning, right, as you kind of get started recording. Then they have the focal bird for a little while, and then they have a bunch of empty space with some handling noise at the end. And so basically what we're suggesting you do is trim the ends of a recording, and then with whatever is left, you normalize that recording. And normalize basically just means adjust the volume of the recording up to a standard level is really all that's being done there. So again, those are just these, you can kind of make an analogy to photography too, where trimming is really just cropping, right? We're just saying, where does the recording start and end? And then the things outside of that, we're just going to discard. We're just talking about what was the actual focal recording I was trying to make. Because it's very common that you'll have a couple of minutes before the bird starts singing, or handling noise right at the beginning before the recording really kicks in. And if you can trim those out before you upload the recording, then people listening to it or you later on don't have to deal with as much of that kind of extraneous parts of the sound. You can skip right to the bird that you were trying to record. And then that second step, that normalize concept, is kind of analogous to like changing the brightness and contrast of a photo. You're not changing the data in it, right? You're not photoshopping out a background or anything like that. All you're doing is making the bird easier to hear or, see in the photo example. So I'll skip back one again and just notice how the levels of that recording up on top, which is a tropical parula singing and chipping, before trimming and normalizing, it was quite low and quiet with some messy handling noise at the beginning. And so all we've really done is trim out those couple of seconds at the beginning and then bring the volume up to a set level. Again, we'll share some resources with a lot more information on how to do this. I'm not going to worry about that right now, but just know that it's a pretty simple process once you get the hang of it, and it'll make your recordings a lot easier to access for you and others. And then I'm not going to go through the details here, but basically there are a lot of tricks you can use in the software like Ocean Audio that give you a lot more control, allow you to do those steps very easily with just keyboard shortcuts instead of needing to click around, and allow you to see your recordings really, really nicely and explore them that way. Okay, so now that you have an edited file, a really key step here is to upload it, right? To put it in your eBird checklist, upload it to the Macaulay Library, because without that, the whole cycle doesn't work. We don't have the data we need to create these tools, to create the Merlin example recordings, to train Merlin Sound ID, to allow birders to explore sounds in the Macaulay Library. So we really need not just making high quality recordings in the field, but also coming back and contributing those to this global database so that anyone can use them. Oh, sorry. Just some suggested shortcuts. Okay, so uploading a recording. Once you have the edited recording, right, the hard part's done. Everything else is really easy. So really no reason to delay on that. You go to your checklist. There's a big Add Media button there. Again, this is easiest to do, I find, on a computer, but you certainly can do it through a browser on a phone as well if that's where you have your files. You click Add Media and you're brought to a separate version of that checklist called Manage Media. And this is where you can upload the recordings, add the metadata, and everything like that. We talked about metadata in the context of the voice announcement, right? As that being a way to preserve some of that important information. This is really the place to put that into action, though, because that metadata panel on the right is where you can enter all these things like there were 2 adult males, they were giving songs and calls, add some notes about whether you saw the bird and what they were doing. All of that information that might be lost if you don't note it down, you can add there, and then it lives with that piece of media in perpetuity, essentially, in the Macaulay Library. So just dragging and dropping onto the species of the appropriate checklist here, adding in that metadata, and then you're left with a nice checklist with a bunch of sound recordings associated with, the birding companions you were with, the number of species, other media, the nice track you have. And then each of those recordings also becomes, we really think of these as audio specimens, right? When you're making a recording, you're associating all this metadata with it, and that is a standalone piece of media that represents what that bird sounded like at that snapshot of time. And this Macaulay Library page for this recording, in this case, a Jamaican crow that I recorded a couple of years ago, is the sort of home page for that recording. It's got all the metadata you added, as well as links to your checklist, links to your own profile and search results, so you can see it all in context with everything else. This is that home page that makes that recording so valuable. You can this is also where you would be able to download your own recording after the fact. So it's almost like the Macaulay Library is a little bit of a personal backup too, where I know that these recordings that I'm uploading, in addition to being used for Merlin Sound ID and by birders, are also a place that I can come back to and get a copy of that recording quickly if I need to. So we have a number of resources on the Macaulay Library website that I encourage you to check out, and we'll probably send along some links, or Lisa will after the webinar. But we have some editing demonstrations and tutorials to help people do that trimming and normalizing step we talked about. More on recording tips, preparing and uploading media, and a lot of other things, even setting up some popular sound recorders. We also have an online course that goes over everything we talked about in much greater detail. Normally it's $100 through the Bird Academy department here at the Lab of Ornithology, but we've got a code for anyone on this webinar to use. It's Caribbean Sound 25 down there on the bottom right. So take a screenshot there, or again, I think we'll be able to share this around later on if you miss it. But this is a really great way if you're sort of interested in sound recording, but this went by a little too fast, or you feel like you're not kind of getting the gist of it. This course is a great way to really step you through not just the field technique, but also the editing, also the just kind of like, why are we recording? Why should I care? Why are birds making all these sounds to begin with? It goes through all of those categories really well, I think. And then finally, just wanted to let you know that we're in the midst of a sound recording challenge for the Neotropics and the Caribbean, where well, actually, Cullen, do you want to pop back on and give a little introduction to the challenge we've got going on?
Yeah, we've been doing actually a series of challenges, where if you meet the challenge, you are in the running to win some free sound recording gear. And so this challenge here is to record at least 30 different species, between, or upload the sounds for at least 30 different species between now and the end of May. So you still have plenty of time, and you can record with Merlin Bird ID, and you could win a really nice Zoom F3 portable recorder and a shotgun microphone. The Zoom F3 portable recorder is a great recorder. It's actually the one that I use. I think Jay may use it some too.
Definitely.
And so yeah.
Very cool. Cool. Well, that's all I've got. How are we doing on time, Lisa? Do you want to
Oh, you guys did
time for
great.
some Q&As?
Yeah, it's just about an hour, so that's perfect. So thank you so much. That was excellent. A really great introduction. And thanks everybody for joining us and being such active participants. Lots of discussion and comments in the chat, which is great. And we do have a few questions at which Jay and Colin will help answer. Also, I just want to announce that this webinar is recorded, so we will put it on our YouTube. And I will put that link in the chat. Be sure to subscribe to us so that you can get notifications. And also tomorrow we will have the same webinar in Spanish. So if you would prefer to hear this in Spanish, and we might also turn on English closed caption. So in case, people want to turn it, show up again, they can sign in and listen to the webinar by a different presenter. So that's great. So yeah, let me go through the questions that we have so far in the chat. Taylor asked, how does Merlin distinguish when two different bird species calls are overlapping each other. In other words, happening at the same time. How do you deal with that?
Right. That's really the challenge, isn't it? Right. Like it's not, we don't have these, even though we're trying to get focal recordings in the field, we don't, the recordings we end up with are never perfectly clean, and the ones that people are using their phones to make are not going to be either. So the real key to that, as to almost any other aspect of training Sound ID, is variety. We train it with not just a couple of recordings and hope it does okay. We train it with hundreds of recordings. And that's simply why we need so many recordings of these species, is that without that, it won't be able to identify those overlaps, or a distant versus a close bird, or a different geographic variation. So we really need to train it not just on the clean recordings, but also on the messy recordings. And that's also why all of your contributions can be so valuable, is because we can strive to make perfect focal recordings, but none of us are going to necessarily. But that's okay. Even what we would consider a lower quality recording is still so valuable, because it gives that data point of this bird sounds like when it's all black whiskered vireos that you can hear with the less common species behind it. So I find it really motivating that not just the clean recordings, but also the busier recordings are really what make Merlin Sound ID so powerful.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, and
and
also
also just
very,
to add to that,
sorry, go ahead.
when it's working, the hope and what we're trying to do is that when you have two birds singing over each other, Merlin's identifying the pattern for both and saying, "Hey, I'm hearing a palm chat and a banana quit," and not just saying one or the other, but it's saying, "Hey, I think I'm hearing these two things. Check these out." And again, I think one of the things that I think is worth repeating is our goal with Sound ID isn't just to help people identify birds, it's to help people learn how to identify birds with the hope that they're using it. And the more they use it, the hope is the less they'll actually need it, because they'll be able to learn these sounds on their own.
That's great. And I might have missed this, but did you all comment on how many different calls or songs that Merlin needs to be able to function well in Sound ID?
Yeah, it really depends on the species, right? A mockingbird is going to need a lot more data than something very stereotyped like a nightjar. But in general, we try to train on at least 100 recordings before we even consider adding a species. And to do that, we actually need even more. So 150 recordings in Macaulay Library is usually what we use as a bar to say, okay, we probably have enough data that captures the variation of this bird that we can start training it.
Okay, great. All right. Somebody else is asking, what is the difference in Sound ID between BirdNet and Merlin?
Yeah, this is always a tricky one, because yeah, BirdNet is another kind of sound recognition thing developed here at the Cornell lab. They were developed in very different ways, and so that's kind of the main reason that they haven't sort of met again in the middle. BirdNet is trained a lot more holistically. So where you saw Cullen showed you the annotations needed for Merlin Sound ID, where it's little boxes around every different vocalization. That's what really gives us the power to kind of pull out those distant birds and overlapping birds and things like that. BirdNet is trained a lot more on kind of putting a lot of data in, but not to the same kind of degree of accuracy. And so that's allowed them to cover a lot more species, which is great. That's kind of the prime thing that they're looking for, is to be able to power research by covering a lot of species. But Merlin is going to be a lot more accurate on a sort of more granular level, because it has this sort of annotation by regional experts of what different birds in the same recording are.
And
Great.
also,
Thank
I think that there's a little bit different goals in these projects, and I think that having these different strategies at the lab has allowed us to learn and really move forward with Sound ID in a lot of different ways. And the ultimate goal is to think about how do we adapt this technology to really support these different use cases. And the Merlin and BirdNet are kind of two different ways that we're exploring that. And so I think it'll be exciting to see how this evolves and what are the new tools that are going to be coming out in the future, as we continue to learn from these projects.
Excellent, thanks. Here's a question from Rashida, and just a reminder, if you have questions, it's helpful if you could put them in the Q&A panel because they can be hard to find in the chat. Thanks. Okay, so Rashida asks, in cases where Wi-Fi is spotty, can the recording be uploaded later? In that case, how is the corresponding exact location documented?
Yeah, that's a great question and really important, right? Because a lot of the places we're going out recording, we're trying to get away from the sounds and phone reception. Yeah, nothing's uploaded in the field, no matter kind of what you're using. And it's worth noting that Merlin is not uploading sounds automatically at all, right? It's still kind of a manual process that you would choose what sound and what bird it goes with. So yeah, it's great to record offline. eBird works very well offline as well. All the tracks and everything. All you have to do is start a checklist. It doesn't matter if you have reception or not. It'll get you can log your species. It'll get your track, and then once you have Wi-Fi or reception again, you can add a location, submit that checklist, and then upload those sounds from your computer, all after the fact. So very important. And in terms of the corresponding exact location, doing that eBird checklist is really the best way to do that. Though you can also note that in your voice announcement, say I'm on this trail at this location, kind of a thing, and that way you don't lose track of that recording going with that location.
Great, thanks, Jay. Question for Colin from Thomas. Do you see problems with public audio data from endangered species due to poaching? For example, there are over 90 audio recordings of the great green macaw on eBird. Xenocanto doesn't publish them, just spectrograms are available for the public.
That's a really good question. And with eBird data, we have sensitive species. And those sensitive species, we don't provide precise localities. But we don't have exactly the same thing with sounds, in part because a lot of the sounds are already available. I think that the way we approach it is with both eBird and also with sounds is trying to weigh the value of having those sound recordings versus the cost of having those sound recordings. And there are some cases that might be uh, um, especially in certain places where there's high levels of trapping, where we have held back from providing some sound recordings within Merlin. But that's an ongoing discussion. Jay, do you have anything to add to that?
No, yeah, just that there are certain sensitive species that we haven't made those like exemplar recordings of, so it's at least one layer removed from the being really easy to use playback for trapping, for example, which is a big problem in places like Indonesia and presumably elsewhere as well. But in terms of playing the audio in Macaulay Library, that's still all open for the time being, but definitely an evolving conversation, certainly.
I think that the other side to that is I actually did my master's on bird trapping and the wildlife trade in South America. And one of the things that's amazing is like um, these these trapping communities, they have sound recording gear, they have access to sound recordings, and people, this is not, limiting access to sounds to the public doesn't necessarily mean you're limiting it from the trapping community. Um, so I think that that's another issue.
Great, thanks. All right, and Jason asks, if we just have a phone, how do we minimize wind? I have heard audio observations on iNatural, so I couldn't hear anything but the wind on the mic. So
Wind is
wind especially.
Yeah, wind is always the one of the greatest enemies of the sound recordist. That's for sure. As you saw in some of those photos, if you're using like a shotgun microphone or a parabola, then there are kind of options for using one of those like fuzzy, furry windscreens or things like that. On a phone, it's particularly challenging though, right? Because the microphone is just there, it's just exposed. I definitely haven't really found the best solution for that. I mean, you can try your best to kind of block your phone with your body because it's kind of omnidirectional. It doesn't necessarily have to be like pointing right at the bird. So you could try, if you're pointing into the wind, you might even try sort of turning it around, and you'll still pick up some of the bird, and block the wind a little bit better. You could potentially try some kind of like foam cover for it too. I haven't done that myself, but I've thought about trying to find some sort of just piece of foam that won't block the sound very much, but would block the wind a little bit. But I don't have any specific kind of like use this hack to do that well. It's a
I,
challenge for sure.
I think the number
You do,
one thing
Colin?
is take advantage of times when it's not windy. That's the best case scenario, and I think it's just a reminder is like when you have those opportunities where it isn't windy, where there's not a car there, where there's not a group of people chatting about something, those are great opportunities to take advantage of. But like, yeah, wind can be tough. So
Yep.
And I hope as we're raising awareness with everybody about the importance of getting more sound recordings, that people will like go out with that intention and try to choose days maybe with, that aren't windy weather, and maybe try to go out times of the day when it's not going to be as noisy, because people are commenting about all of the background noises, machines, vehicles,
Right.
landscaping tools. It's really, really challenging in the Caribbean to dogs barking, roasters crowing, all of that.
Yeah. I never realized how many like airplanes there are just flying over.
Yeah.
Every minute there's an airplane flying over. Until I started sound recording, I never realized that. It's
Mhm.
really
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
but I mean, I wouldn't discount also recording in urban environments. There's been times when I've gotten decent recordings of birds in the middle of the city just because the bird was, as Jay said, I happen to be close to the bird. Birds in cities, sometimes they're habituated to people. There's people walking all around. And if you're just like, if there's a bird like right above you and it's by far the closest thing, sometimes, it's just convenient to get a decent recording. So
Right.
you don't necessarily have to be in like a really remote place to get decent recordings is what I'm saying.
Great. That's super helpful. Thanks. So one asks, and you've touched on this a little bit, but maybe you can comment a little bit more. Is there any plan to merge Merlin with BirdNet at some point? And would it be possible to send recordings from Merlin to eBird? Maybe review that a little bit more.
Yeah, I think we touched on the BirdNet thing sufficiently. Not really any immediate plans, just because of the very different kind of data models that they take advantage of. In terms of sending recordings from Merlin to eBird, that's definitely something that we'd like to make a clearer pipeline for, right? Maybe make the ability to trim and normalize within Merlin, and have a more direct way to upload that to an eBird checklist. So definitely something we're actively investigating. For the time being, it is sort of a manual process, right? We're not taking every second of audio that you're recording on Merlin. That's up to you to pull those files out and upload them specifically.
And if you have a computer, it is really advent. I really enjoy looking at my recording on my computer where I can normalize it. I use Ocean Audio, and I just save it. I have it kind of set up. So from Merlin, I just save it directly to my computer. And there's different ways you can do that on Android and on iOS devices. And so when I open my computer, the file's already there. I can just drag it and drop it in Ocean Audio, and then normalize it, cut what I don't want, and that makes it actually really easy to upload. But what Jay's talking about, that pipeline where you can normalize and trim within Merlin, when we get that, that's going to make it a lot easier. That'll be really nice.
Great. Yes, for sure. And I guess in part two of this webinar series, you would do a little bit more about using the audio software and how to work with that. Colin and Jay, yes. Yeah,
Seems like a good idea. Yep.
yeah, great. All right, and another question here from Michelle. We often record video of birds in the field to use for educational purposes. Is there a possibility to include recorded sounds of birds from video, or is it best to separate it from video and upload this separately?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think if the if the recording was made primarily for the audio, then separating it and uploading it separately is the way to go. That'll allow us to sort of treat it as audio like everything else, do those annotations that Colin was showing, have that nice spectrogram to show. If it's, you know, a good video as well, not everyone can upload videos on eBird currently, but if you contact the Macaulay Library and basically request to upload videos, then we can allow that access too. We're just trying to keep it to more kind of higher quality material there, just because of how big videos tend to be. But yeah, short answer: if audio was the focus, then it's pretty easy to extract that audio in a program like Audacity or one of the ones we looked at today, and just upload it as a recording. And that's a pretty reasonable way to make a recording too. It's about the same quality as you would make using your phone at that point.
Great, thanks. Okay, Noelia asks, is there any chance to get involved in any acoustic project?
Let's be more specific to be sure, but I mean, I think that everything we talked about today would qualify there in terms of being a, you know, a data contributor to this type of project. You know, like we talked about at the beginning, these species from the Caribbean are you know, really underrepresented in the database, just because they're only found on, you know, in many cases one or two islands, right? So just by going out and recording what might be the common birds in your backyard, you'll be making potentially a really big difference in this kind of global Merlin Sound ID development, and just our knowledge of birds of the Caribbean. We do also, the kind of next step to that is we do need expert annotators to go in and say, this is this bird and this is that bird, make those little boxes with the identifications. And so that is something that we'll be looking for, is people who are really familiar with all the birds in their area and can identify every single little chip note or call. Those people we will want to engage with to do that annotation, to do the next level of training. So in that respect, if there are sound experts out there, they should definitely get in touch for that process.
Yeah, that would be great. And it's something I think we can cover more in part 2 and actually try to recruit people, you know, because I know there's experts on every island that might be able to help out, which would be awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, and Mary
Absolutely.
asks, should commentary be trimmed out of audio recording and placed in checklist media metadata section?
Yeah, these are very good questions. So that voice announcement I was talking about is really, really valuable to make in the field, because it allows you to come back to your recording and know what was it I was recording that day, right? What was it doing? Where was I? Whether you include that in the recording you upload is up to you. A lot of us do, because it is kind of another check. It's what I was feeling in the field. It's what that bird was doing. It's kind of a nice to keep that with the sound recording at the end usually. But you don't have to if you transcribe it into the metadata section, as Mary suggests, putting it in the media notes and basically, you know, word for word, or summarizing what it was that was going on in that recording. That will accomplish the same thing. So none of us really like the sound of our own voice. It is kind of weird to talk into the microphone, and it definitely takes some getting used to. It's not a natural thing to do, but it is super important in the field, and can be really helpful to include after the fact too. But ultimately, it's a matter of your preference.
Hey, great. I
Yeah,
just
and
want
I think that, again, just to highlight, the most important thing is you get that data into the notes field and the details field, so it's searchable, so that other people can find it and make sure they access it, because it's, you know, it's harder to search for notes in the sound recording, but you won't have those notes if you don't make your voice notes at the end of your recording. It's, I think it's like the number one thing when somebody starts recording, it's the number one thing that people have trouble with or are hesitant to, is to make voice notes. And you know, it's something that you really want to like practice being like, okay, you know, what else can I add that's gonna like really provide context? Because you go back to these sound recordings 2 months later or sometimes longer, and you're like, what was I trying to record? You know, and you don't, it's not like a photo, you have so much visual context for it.
definitely, yeah, that's a really good tip, something I need to start doing. All right, and Carmen says, I absolutely love Merlin Bird ID. I've been using it almost daily for the last 5 years, and especially on my travels around the world. in the Caribbean and in Southeast Asia, as you mentioned, these massive data gaps. Does this mean that all my recordings from these areas where the AI model and Merlin wasn't able to recognize the bird are not automatically updated and added into eBird Macaulay Library? Do I need to add them manually?
Yes. Unfortunately, yes. Yeah, we can't take your data without you giving it to us, basically. Like it wouldn't that would be using up, your phone bandwidth and all that stuff. So yes, the recordings you made are on your phone and nowhere else. So if there are ones where yeah, you want to contribute that, then that eBird pipeline that we showed is the way to do that for the time being.
Great. All right. And Susan says, spectrograms stopped displaying on a recent Merlin bird ID update. I no longer see them on any sound recordings. Any ideas? Perhaps I'm doing something wrong.
Would have to yeah, would have to chat directly about that. I don't know that I could diagnose that off the top of my head. Some people have had issues with that when certain voice recognition settings are on, or if obviously if you had like a microphone plugged in that was not on or something, that could cause that. But more likely it's some glitch in the app. I guess the typical thing is to say reinstall and see if that fixes it. Though I realize that can be pretty annoying, lose all your recordings and stuff like that. So make sure to back them up before doing that.
All right. Thanks. So Michelle's is asking, she says local differences in sound from birds of the same species that occur on different islands, which many of us are familiar with, local variations, island variations. So even general species might need local recording for accuracy. Yes.
Totally. Yep. Perfect example. I mean, the Caribbean is a really great example of that. Training, if we only trained on banana quits from Puerto Rico, like that wouldn't do us a lot of good in Jamaica or anywhere else. So that's one of the reasons why we need so many files and really want to make sure that we get representation from all the areas of a bird's range.
Right. All right. And Jay Walker asks, is Merlin ever used to help with determine the health or age of a bird? Or is that a level of detail not possible to pick up on? Do any species ever vocalize differently when they have a particular disease? And if so, could Merlin be useful in tackling issues with bird flu and other pandemics?
That's
I would
definitely
say go for it,
That's
Colin.
definitely an interesting question, and I think that there's different ways of looking at it. For now, Merlin ID identifies a species to species and doesn't even differentiate different call notes. Like it doesn't differentiate between song and call or one group from another group. Where the focus is getting the identification to the species. And I have not heard of uh, um, particular sound being associated with a disease or the health of a bird. But that's one of the reasons why we're creating a collection, because you never know what you'll be able to discover over time as you have better representation of each species.
Yeah, and that's a really potentially great example of why those media notes, the metadata that you're capturing in your voice announcement, are so important. Because if we'll never know the answer to that question unless somebody goes out, records, and also puts that data together of this was a bird that seemed to be sick and it was making this vocalization. For example, there are lots of other examples that we know, are the case. Different context, behavioral context, age and sex differences. But without you keeping track of it in the field and making those recordings, then we'll never be able to know the answer to that.
Mhm. Excellent. All right. And Noelle is asking, you've already touched on this, but maybe you can comment a little bit more. How often are new recordings needed to capture regional differences in vocalization?
Yeah, I don't have a concrete answer to that other than to say that the more the better, right? The more we have current things, there are certainly plenty of documented cases of birdsong changing over time, whether it's changing in frequency of pitch based on traffic noise changes or just new dialects cropping up in new populations or through existing populations. So I can't say there, a specific time frame, but the more we get current recordings coming in to compare with older recordings, the better we'll be able to keep on top of any changes.
Excellent.
And
Okay.
also being, having, being on islands, this is the kind of situation where you're going to have local dialects that are potentially changing. And so really continuing to document sounds over time across these different islands is going to be uh, um, really valuable for current and future research.
Absolutely. All right. Pavia says, I keep trying to record, but so many human sounds interrupt the process no matter how early I start after sunrise. Would the sound equipment block these sounds from the focal bird recording?
They would
They'll
help.
certainly help. Yep.
But
But there's no magic wand, right? There's no amount of specialized equipment will just erase all the background sound and get you that perfect vocal recording. But a directional microphone will help you record your target bird with everything else being a little quieter. So the farther you can go down that road, the better. Don't expect that to be the magic wand that just makes everything else disappear though. But yep, that would be the next step to try to isolate the birds from all that anthropogenic noise.
Great. Jorge is asking, have there been any significant changes to the Merlin algorithm recently? I'm from Colombia. My impression is that last year I was able to detect a lot more species than I can now, even common ones.
We are definitely always constantly updating the algorithm. We are always adding new species more than anything, right? We're only covering the species that have enough data and we've been able to get the annotations for. So there are definitely lots of changes that can happen. We might add a new species that sounds like an existing species in the model, and then the model realizes, oh wait, I'm not sure about either of these. That could be one reason. We're more often adding species than removing them, but we are trying to make things more accurate constantly. So it's hard to know without seeing a recording, without seeing the examples. But certainly nothing kind of fundamental has changed about the way the model works. It just kind of knows more about the full picture than it did previously. There will be a nice big update coming out in early May that should add a whole bunch more neotropical species, as well as a handful of Caribbean ones that we've been able to add so far. So stay tuned for that, and that should be a nice boost to the number of species you're getting results for in places like Colombia, especially.
Great. Okay, and Rodrigo asks, is it possible to make a small parabola to my cell phone? That was something that I would like to know because all the noise in the city is a bit stressful.
it's
Try not to
definitely
let it stress you
possible.
out.
It's definitely possible. And actually, we've been working with a group in Africa that's been exploring the low cost, some very low cost options for creating a parabola. The results are not very clear. I think that sometimes they're just like, well, it hasn't been that much better than just using their cell phone. And so I think that my advice is that if you're thinking about getting into like trying to create a parabola for your cell phone, I might
Welcome,
first
everybody. Sorry. Sorry.
I first look at a shotgun microphone, and then actually look for, if you're going to get into parabola, then actually look for a nicer parabola, you know. Um,
Yep. Yeah, you can definitely have some sort of setup that would amplify a little bit, but the like real parabolas have a lot of qualities that are hard to replicate. They have to be sort of a specific curve to really take the best advantage of that amplification. They have to be really hard and reflective. So, right, hard plastic or metal is going to work a lot better than like wood or cardboard, which is not going to really be very reflective. So, I'm sure somebody creative could come up with a pretty reasonable thing to attach, but um, unless you are that a lot handier than I am, I would recommend what Colin said. Think about starting with a small shotgun and maybe graduate up to a parabola if you think it's something you really want to invest in.
All right, great. And I see a question from Lucy from the Virgin Islands. She says, here in the VI, we have many domesticated red jungle fowls and they overpower many of the other bird noises in our area. It's hard for me to get an idea on something other than the jungle fowl. Is there any way to exclude a bird?
I guess I'm not sure if she means exclude the results or exclude it like as if you were excluding like the human noise, right? That we were talking about before. I think all the
I
same
think she's
kind of
asking, can you
techniques.
select to exclude the roosters from
Yeah.
from
No, I mean all those techniques we talked about for trying to get a focal species apply there too, right? Try to get closer to the bird you're trying to record, which will make the roosters comparatively farther away. Try to find a place with less activity for them. Try to
yeah.
use if you have access to a directional microphone, that can help as well. But yeah, kind of all those same techniques apply whether it's river noise, surf, airplanes, people, it's all kind of the same.
Yeah. All right. Okay, just a couple more questions and then I think we'll wrap it up. Mary asks, in the report no matches submission in Merlin app, are there any plans to allow some comment to be included?
Yeah, no plans. Again, because we're not necessarily getting all of your audio data, right? That's not being uploaded automatically. So there's only so much we can do with that information. Definitely if you're finding like there's a bird that should be in the model that you're never getting identifications for, reporting that to the Merlin like help desk can be good. And then that can allow us to take a look and see why maybe it's not performing very well. But the most useful thing is if you record a bird, you don't get matches, would be to download your recording and upload it to an eBird checklist. And then it's in the pool of data for us to train on and will allow us to hopefully either add that species or make that species perform better for your region by having that in the Macaulay Library.
Okay, great.
Um, Lisa, there's a couple of things that came up that I think are really worth noting in the comments before. One was I'm using Merlin offline. You can find some information about this in the Help Center, but both Merlin and eBird are designed to work offline. For Merlin, before you go into the field, you want to make sure that you download the species pack and also you want to assign the location. And so one of the best things you can do is like, let's say you're going to a location where you might not have internet access, then test it out, assign that list of likely species under the explore functionality and make sure that it's going to be working for you there. But it really is set up to be working offline. Another one that I want to kind of note is about file name. While Jay was giving his presentation, somebody asked about file name, and I think this is so important, right? Because like, uh, um, uh, um, m- with a lot of recordings, or with a lot of recording gear, it will allow you to assign the date and the time as the file name, and this can be so useful for aligning it up with your eBird checklist. We highly recommend that. This is also what Merlin does. And whenever I change a file, I'll oftentimes add some information so I can link it up with that species, but I'm not putting a ton of information there. And I always retain the original file name. And that's because if I've uploaded something to the sound recording and I'm like, go back to it, and I'm like, oh, wait, I want to see if there's any other information in there. Maybe I want to listen to the voice announcement or whatever. I can always associate that recording in the Macaulay Library with the original file. And so there's a couple of pointers answering that question. And then finally, the last question, which I'm going to pass off to Jay, that I think is an important question by Miguel, is about he asked, would you recommend low cut filters be turned on for recordings? And I think that that's an important question. Jay, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. And that's probably something that we could get more into in a more advanced webinar later on too. But sort of short answer is um, you can. This is kind of the idea of like cutting out certain frequencies of a recording not after the fact, but like during recording, or you can do it after the fact. It's something we don't encourage people to go too far into because it's very easy to kind of remove too much information and make your recording sound unnatural or kind of lose data that might have actually been important to the recording. So easiest answer is just say, don't worry about it. Record what you record, and you know, just follow those trim and normalize steps. Don't do too much extra editing. A little bit more nuanced answer would be that a low filter is okay in moderation, as long as it's not going above a couple of 100 hertz, right? So you're not getting into kind of the bands where the birds are, and it can help, especially with, it doesn't actually reduce wind. It just makes it easier to kind of normalize the recording louder, rather than wind being the absolute loudest thing. So a light, low cut or high pass, same thing, filter can be okay to do, but don't feel like you need to kind of investigate and play around with it. It's not something that you should have to do for most recordings.
I guess one of the key things about that is that you can always filter out information from a recording, but you can never get it back. And when you don't know how that information is being used, I think you want to use a lot of caution, because you know anything you put up, if it's being used for something, people can apply filters to it, whatnot, but you can't. And we often times see problems where people over filter. So
Yep, exactly. Good, well said.
Great. Really good information. Okay, we'll take one last question from Pavia. When making a recording on Merlin, it asks you to report with eBird. What happens to that recording?
So the report to eBird just means that it essentially switches you over to the eBird app to create a checklist, like we saw. So the recording doesn't do anything until you then also upload that recording to that checklist. Same for reporting in Merlin, like creating that observation. No, there's no, again, we kind of don't have your permission to automatically upload all this data, so you have to specifically go in and connect that recording with the checklist. That also makes sure that you know, we're getting the correct location and not just the location where you happened to be when you uploaded it or something like that.
All right, great. Well, I think we will wrap it up. I want to say thank you so much to Colin and Jay for your excellent presentations. We will be posting this on our YouTube channel. And also I recommend that you follow us on social media or sign up to our newsletter and our listserv. I put links in the chat because we'll be announcing part 2 of this webinar, where Jay and Colin will get more into details about editing your recordings and how to annotate them and you know, further into equipment and so forth. So I think it'll be really useful for some of you that are excited to get out and do more recording and contribute to this database. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us, and we hope to see you on the next part 2 webinar. And if you'd like to hear this again in Spanish tomorrow, tune in at 2 p.m. Just be sure to register for that webinar as well separately. All right, thanks again. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Lisa.